Today we're going to be talking about a few things that you can forage right now. And right now we'll just start off right off the bat. Hopefully it's not too much background noise, but this tree that's right behind me is an American hackberry tree. One of many different kinds of species of hackberry trees that you can find all over throughout Europe and the US. Specifically, this one is fruiting or way past fruiting this time of year. All the leaves are kind of falling off, so all you have to look for is the berries, and you can see them a lot more easily as opposed to finding them earlier in the season. So right now I'll show you all some close-ups of what these berries looks like, and I'll be picking them and hopefully showing you how to process them into some kind of hackberry milk, which I've made one time before, but I'll be making again and trying to change the recipe a bit and show you all that as well. So for those of you that are new to the channel, I do want to say thank you. I'm still trying to move a lot of my other stuff over here, where I can have longer form content talking about stuff. So, and all the people have been really supporting me and wanting to see more of different stuff. I'm still learning this stuff myself, and it's fun to see a whole community grow and blossom around something that I enjoy, and seemingly many other people enjoy too. So that's really cool. I'll keep picking away at these. If you're a beginner and you want to start learning how to identify trees, there's a few things that you need to look out for on the tree to help you identify. And also, if you were to post in a subreddit or get cross-identification help from people who are experienced, you need to take pictures and look out for these certain characteristics. In this case, one of the easiest giveaways for identifying trees is going to be the leaves and the fruiting bodies. In this case, as an example, this tree right next to me is an American hackberry tree. One of the many trees that you have growing all over the place. And if you look at the leaves, in this case, it is a very distinct leaf shape because it's asymmetrical, and it's got serrated edges on the margins of the leaf. So taking that into account, if someone were to look at this and have had experience, they'd be able to put two and two together and note, hey, this is probably an American hackberry tree. Also taking into account the location and the bark of the tree, coupled with these three things, you can get a good idea of what species a tree is just by looking at the leaves, the fruiting bodies, or the trunk, or the bark of the tree. All of those things, if you combine them together, can help you come to a really good ID for your tree of choice. I'll give another example of a tree, and another example of a tree would be like this tree right behind me. And this tree is an oak tree. Specifically, this is one of our native northern red oak trees. And just because, one, the location that I'm in here in Illinois, I know that we only have a set group of oak trees that are going to grow here unless they're specifically cultivated in the landscaping. So that helps me pinpoint what kind of oak tree that I'm going to have growing here. And your red oak trees, if we look, they're very distinct looking. Oak trees are always going to have acorns on them. Across the board, if you see a tree growing with acorns, you know you're going to have some kind of oak tree. But how I know this is a red oak tree is because if I look at the leaves, and I look really closely on the lobes, that's what these little protruding points of the leaf are called lobes. If I look closely on the lobes, you're going to see these pointed edges, and that is specific to red oak trees. So that's how I know this is going to be some kind of red oak tree. And I know it's not a white oak tree. One, if I look at the acorns, or any kind of bur oak tree, there's not going to be any birds that are coming off these acorns, and they're much smaller compared to other species of oak trees that you'll find growing around. Also in the fall, the leaves are going to start turning yellow, and then they're going to turn brown and fall off the tree. So that's a way to identify specifically this red oak tree. If we also look at the bark, compared to the previous shot of the hackberry tree that we saw, the bark looks a lot different. Notice how it's growing in cross patterns, and it's blocky. It doesn't protrude out too much, and you can't really peel the bark off. It's really stuck on the tree really well compared to other species of oak trees or maple trees that you'll find growing around. This tree that I'm leaning against and standing underneath is a sycamore tree, which is loosely related to maple trees, but it's its own separate species. And there's a few species of sycamores, but specifically what makes this one different from species of maples is the fact that it doesn't have samaras. Samaras are those helicopter structures that you'll see that grow on species of maples or even tree of heaven, and they kind of swiddle down, and they're not fruit, but they're connected to the fruiting parts of trees. So basswood trees also have that too. And I'll show you all an example of one that's growing over there as well. But the fruit of a sycamore looks like this. They look like green little pom-poms. And if you were to look at the leaves, of a sycamore, you'll notice that they're much wider than a maple leaf, and they don't have as prominent lobes of a maple tree. If you also were to get really close up on this tree and look at the bark, you'll notice that the bark at the base of the tree looks a lot different from the bark that grows closer to the top of the tree. The closer up you get to the top, the more it looks like the tree was whittled or peeled back on the bark. So it's very distinct looking. So if you were to go out in the winter time, you definitely would be able to identify this tree just by looking at the bark. So it's really cool. The closer up you get to the top, the more it looks like the tree was whittled or peeled back on the bark. So it's very distinct looking. So if you were to go out in the winter time, you definitely would be able to identify this tree just by looking at the bark. So it's really cool. And I'll show you an example of what a samara is on a tree that isn't a maple, but it does have samaras. So this is an example of an American lindenwood or basswood or linden basswood. It's got many common names, but I like to call it a basswood tree. So in this case, this is a tree that has samaras. Now, samaras aren't necessarily just a tree that has those little helicopter structures. Those are an example of a more popular one, if you will. A samara botanically just refers to a structure that is attached to the fruiting body of a tree. So if you notice, this lime color leaf, or samara, that's growing here, is not a leaf, but it's its own separate structure that is separate from the leaf. And it grows next to the fruit, which these are actually is the ones that you see a lot of other foragers making lindenwood chocolate or linden tree chocolate. They grind these up and add oil to them to make an edible chocolate, which is really cool. So these have samaras, which is a good thing to note, versus that other tree that we saw over there, the sycamore, not having any samaras. It just has the fruit growing off of the tree. Something that's cool that we have growing right here too is an example of galls. Now, galls are structures on leaves where little insects or wasps or larvae will lay their eggs on top of the leaf, and the leaf will actually start growing around them until eventually, once the larva has eaten enough and got enough nutrients from the leaf, it'll hatch its way out. I don't know what kind of species of gall this is specifically, or what gall or what insect is inside of this, but it is a gall that you'll find growing on linden trees often, which is really cool. As I'm here in the park walking around this oak tree that's right next to me, which is a red oak tree, I notice that I'm looking at the grass. I'm like, oh, there's nice grasses coming up. There's some tall grass. But as I look really closely and pay attention, I notice there's something really specific that's here that, man, honestly, a lot of people might walk over if they're not closely paying attention. And that's why I'm going to point this out to you. I'm walking around this tree and I'm like, notice, oh, there's a nice mulberry sapling that's growing in between the crotch of this red oak tree. And I'm looking at the grass. I'm like, okay, wow, this is a really nice, patches of grass that are coming up, maybe even like some small pockets of it that's growing up from the shade. But then I noticed this guy, which if you notice really closely, kind of stands out a lot differently from the other grass. And it's not flat like the other blades of grass that were growing here, and it kind of has a slightly bluish tinge, if you will. So my first thing is like, okay, let me look at the bulbs. I notice they're even kind of white at the edges. So I'm like, huh. And as I move my fingers through it, I have a smell coming up, and I break off a piece. And this that's growing right here is wild garlic, which is actually, I believe, invasive. It kind of can grow in patches really quickly and spread. You find this growing all over the place throughout the spring. But I actually only thought that it had one growing season, that it kind of grew in the spring and then died off and then came back in the spring again next season. But we actually have it coming up again for 2 times. So I'm assuming it has 2 flowering seasons, which is actually pretty interesting. So if you notice, now I see patches of it everywhere. There's a patch of it, there's a patch of it, and there's a whole bunch of more patches of it growing all over the place. And if you were to dig this up, you would find little bulbs of garlic. Now, they're not going to be the big commercial garlic that you'll see with the huge cloves, but if you do pull this apart, you would see tiny little cloves of garlic that are underneath here. Now, I don't need any garlic today. I won't be harvesting any of it at the moment, but it is an example of just how much onions and garlic you can find. Now, so I was recording some earlier and showing you all some of the stuff that I was finding more as I walked down the trail, but it is starting to rain. And I love to be out here, and I don't mind actually foraging in the rain, but it is kind of cold too. I don't want to be cold and wet. So hopefully I'll revisit doing something like this in the future. When it is on a nicer day, I'll go back out and record some more tomorrow. But hopefully you all enjoyed some of the stuff that I showed off in this video. But I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all are looking forward to more of this kind of long form style, and tell me what you all want to see more of too. I will have a Patreon, and I will have at some point have an Etsy shop where you all can buy the walking sticks I'm working on. So yeah, thanks all for the support to the channel.